Russia's drone campaign against Ukraine is increasingly hitting one of the most vulnerable parts of everyday civilian life: petrol stations and fuel infrastructure. In recent attacks, Russian drones have targeted fuel hubs in Ukraine, with strikes reported across several areas. In one northeastern city, at least 2 people were injured following drone attacks. The growing attacks on petrol stations are creating new risks for drivers, communities, and businesses, while raising concerns over how easily essential fuel supplies can be disrupted during wartime. According to the figures highlighted in these reports, at least 246 petrol stations have been hit so far, with July alone recording 114 verified Russian strikes on filling stations. These attacks are significant because petrol stations are more than commercial businesses. They are essential infrastructure for civilians, emergency services, transport operators, and local authorities. When a filling station is damaged or forced to shut, the impact can quickly spread to surrounding communities. Drivers may have to travel much farther to find fuel, while some key roads are left without functioning stations. During an air raid alert, even reaching an alternative station can become dangerous. Police and local authorities are therefore urging drivers to take air raid warnings seriously and leave exposed areas when alerts are issued. Petrol stations are particularly vulnerable because they contain large quantities of combustible fuel. A drone strike can potentially trigger fires, explosions, and secondary damage, putting workers and nearby civilians at risk. The use of destructive Shahid-type drones has made the threat even more serious. These drones can travel long distances and are relatively difficult to detect and intercept consistently, allowing attacks to occur far from the immediate front lines. For civilians, that means the danger is no longer limited to traditional battlefield zones. The disruption is also forcing communities to adapt. In some villages, residents are reportedly storing fuel in hidden locations to ensure they have access to essential supplies if nearby filling stations are destroyed or shut down. But storing fuel brings its own dangers. Strict safety rules are being emphasized, particularly during air alerts, because fuel can become extremely hazardous if an area is hit by a drone or missile. Authorities are attempting to balance the need to maintain fuel supplies with the requirement to protect civilians from fires, explosions, and further attacks. The situation has become particularly difficult in the Kherson region, where some petrol stations have been forced to halt operations because of the security threat. In Trostianets, authorities and local operators have turned to mobile fuel tankers as an alternative way of supplying residents. Instead of relying entirely on permanent filling stations, mobile systems can move fuel to locations where it is most urgently needed. This is an example of how Ukraine is trying to keep essential services running despite repeated attacks. Fuel companies and local communities are also taking defensive measures, with some chains building anti-drone shelters and strengthening protection around their facilities. The reported strategy behind these attacks appears to extend beyond simply destroying fuel. Petrol stations are visible symbols of normal civilian life. They support commuting, transportation, deliveries, and emergency response. Repeated strikes can therefore create fear and uncertainty even when the physical damage remains limited. If residents begin to worry that a petrol station could be attacked while they are filling their vehicles, they may avoid traveling altogether. That can have a psychological effect, disrupting daily life and making people feel that nowhere is completely safe. Ukrainian officials and observers have consequently viewed some of these attacks as part of a broader effort to terrorize and pressure the civilian population. Yet, despite the large number of individual attacks, the overall impact on Ukraine's fuel market is reportedly still relatively small. That is partly because the country has multiple fuel suppliers, alternative distribution routes, and mechanisms for replacing damaged facilities. A single petrol station can be destroyed or temporarily closed without necessarily creating a nationwide fuel shortage. However, the situation becomes more complicated when attacks are repeated across multiple locations. Damage to roads, storage facilities, distribution networks, and filling stations can collectively increase transportation costs and make fuel harder to access in particular regions. The problem is especially acute along roads that already have limited infrastructure. If several filling stations on a major route stop operating, drivers can suddenly find themselves traveling long distances without reliable access to fuel. For emergency vehicles, delivery trucks, and other essential services, that creates additional logistical pressure. Ukraine therefore faces a constant challenge, keeping the civilian fuel network operational while preparing for the possibility that more facilities could come under attack. The use of anti-drone shelters, mobile tankers, and decentralized fuel storage reflects a broader wartime adaptation. Instead of depending on a small number of large and easily identifiable facilities, communities are attempting to spread resources across multiple locations. This can make the overall system more resilient, but it also demonstrates how deeply the war has entered everyday civilian infrastructure. For drivers, authorities are continuing to stress one simple message. When an air raid alert is issued, safety must come first. Petrol stations should not become places where people remain exposed simply because they are waiting to refuel. Workers and customers may need to move to designated shelters or safer locations until the threat passes. Russia's continuing drone campaign is therefore creating a difficult situation for Ukraine's fuel network. Hundreds of petrol stations have reportedly been affected, dozens of attacks have been verified in a single month, and some regions are already relying on unconventional methods to maintain supplies. At the same time, Ukraine's fuel market has so far managed to absorb much of the disruption. The bigger question is whether the frequency and geographic spread of these attacks will increase. If strikes remain isolated, the national fuel market may continue to cope. But if attacks increasingly target fuel distribution networks, storage facilities, and major transport routes together, the consequences could become much more serious. For now, Ukraine is adapting through mobile fuel supplies, protective shelters, decentralized storage, and heightened safety measures. But every new strike carries the possibility of casualties, fires, and further disruption. The battle over fuel stations may not change the overall balance of the war by itself, but for ordinary Ukrainians, it represents something much more immediate. The struggle to keep basic civilian life functioning while drones continue to threaten infrastructure far from the front lines.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to Mirror Now.